My guest is CJ Martes. CJ was visited by 13 seraphim angels, and it totally changed her life, and now we're going to learn about it. CJ, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me today to tell this story. Mm-hmm. I love sharing it, and I'm just happy to be with you today.
Oh, that's great. Now, I'm going to say this up front, and I'm going to have to expose myself, but I don't even know what seraphim angels are. So can you first tell us what those are before you tell us about your experience?
Oh, I'd be happy to. I think that that's a term maybe many of your listeners wouldn't know for certain. And so that's a great place to start. There are many different types of angels, and seraphim were considered to be like the host of heaven, meaning that their frequency was the closest to the creation source of energy. Many of, we talk about like Archangel Michael, you'll read about, or people may connect with angels in various ways. And actually the archangels were also seraphim. However, they kind of hold a different position in what they do to help us. So the seraph were named because they were called the fiery ones. The word seraph means fiery. And the reason for that was just when they would, if you look at historically in biblical times, when they would appear, it would often be as a very fiery presence, or, something that people couldn't look at with their eyes. I knew about angels, but I did not know actually what a seraphim really was until my experience. But they often are depicted with 3 sets of wings. And what's so interesting about them in just historically or biblically, you would see them depicted with a regular set of wings, like we would think of an angel having, a set that goes across their face and one that goes across and then another set downward. And the reason is that it was believed that if you looked into the face of a seraphim, you actually wouldn't survive that. But you'll often see that because I find the history of angels in our world and how we have reported that really interesting. So you could consider them, and they're as kind of a higher frequency, upper echelon, if we looked at it as a hierarchy kind of angel.
I like the way that you broke down the word seraphim. So can you tell me, what does it mean? Or can you break down the word archangel, and what does that mean?
There are typically 13 of these archangels. And, in my opinion, I think maybe scholars might say something different, but we have angelic beings all the time that watch over us. What my understanding of what an archangel, which is like arch, we tend to keep that H silent when we say that, the arch that overreaches, the universe. They hold such a special place in holding the cosmos together. Most people don't realize that. Mm-hmm. And so they are an overarching presence that has kind of reach over all of the other angelic beings. That's why, when you think of the archangels, they're Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and others. They are invoked for specific reasons, right? So in many ways, you can have other angels benefiting you, but you can go directly to the archangels because they hold such a powerful energy, and they hold an energy in a particular way. And I like to look at it as frequency, right? Very high frequencies at a quantum level. And those energies are all depicted in different ways. And so like when we talk about archangel, we know he's the protector. He has protection energy. He has a swift and fierce, kind of frequency. And so people will ask, oh, archangel, please give me strength. We might pray, or we might meditate, or we might try to connect with these energies. Mm-hmm. And so when I say when I think of an archangel, I really break that down as that they are the overarching establishment, basically, of the angelic realm. That's kind of how we call the space they inhabit, right? So.
Mm-hmm. most of you guys don't know, but CJ used to have a radio show about angels. So I consider CJ an expert on angels. So while I've got you here, I'm just picking your brain because I think you're the perfect person for it. You have names like Archangel Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and then you have Archangel Metatron. Right? With that name, is that a biblical name? Well, I don't want to be poking fun at the name, but I mean, that's so different from like, Gabriel, Raphael, Michael.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm getting goosebumps right now, which is always kind of a confirmation from the angels. I think they might like this question today. Metatron was a unique and different type of archangel. He was not created to be an archangel. In fact, Metatron is the energy of Enoch, who lived in biblical times. He was one of the only humans ever reported to have been taken to heaven, to actual heaven, to meet God. And he was endowed with these special abilities at that time. He actually returned to the earth to report these things and became eventually, when he passes in the human sense, the scribe of God, and he becomes the archangel Metatron. And so he's the only archangel that used to be a human being. And when I've connected with that energy, it is very unique. It's not exactly the same. It's quite extraordinary. It's almost like science and spirituality kind of meet. He holds a very different, unique space. So I think it's interesting. I was actually talking about how different Archangel Metatron was to a friend of mine yesterday. And she said, well, I've never really connected with that energy. I said, well, be prepared. It's kind of different. It's not the same. And so he imparts wisdom. So Metatron is essentially, because he's the scribe of God, is connected to history. It's connected to the past. It's connected to the now. And so we consider him, I say we, me and the angels that I work with, we kind of call him the magician because of the space that he holds. So very unique of the archangels. And so you hear Metatron and you go, well, what kind of name is that? And that has to do with sacred geometry, the name and what he kind of wields, which is very different, right, than Archangel Michael or Gabriel or any of the others that you hear more often about.
Is Metatron's name mentioned in the Bible?
Not to my understanding, right? I think that comes later. I've never really actually researched or asked about that. I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. But in my understanding, even in ancient or text outside of the Bible, he's Enoch. And so we can trace his origins to that. I am not certain, though, when he became the Archangel Metatron as far as referring to him.
It's like we could have a whole podcast on Metatron.
Kind of, yeah. How to connect and he's the most interesting one. I find him because I consider myself a little of the scientist plus the very etheric kind of person, right, and left brain, and so he appeals kind of to both sides of me, I think. And we certainly could have probably numerous conversations about angelic beings in general, which I think are extremely important to us right now.
All right, well, let's get into your experience because I'll talk about angels and I think we'll never get there. So let's start with that.
Okay. Wonderful. So I have to preface, the story just a little bit where I was at in my life. I was about 22 years of age. I had been through a couple of very abusive marriages. Prior to this, I was a single mom of 2 kids. And, life for me, looking back retrospectively, was like surviving over and over again, just in survival mode. And I think we can all relate to that. When trauma happens, we keep going. We try to keep going. And I met the love of my life, my very best friend, David, when I was around 22, 23. And I had been through some bad experiences. So I'm like, well, if we're he had his son from a previous marriage. I have my 2 daughters, and let's just move in together. And we decided to do that first, right? Let's just see what comes up, because baggage comes up once you get, in the same household. So we did that. And the almost moment that we move in, something starts to happen to me. And the way I would describe this, Jeff, is here I am. I'm happy. I have a heart connection. He's a safe person. He loves me for who I am, and I should feel better. That's what I was telling myself. I should feel better. I should be happy now, but I wasn't. And so that first month or so, I started to get really depressed. And what I think was really driving the depression is that I kept seeing flashing images of the trauma, abuse, right? I just kept seeing these things like a still frame just kept coming up. And I'm a very visual person. So it was almost a little like PTSD, right? Where everything that's ever happened to me starts to cycle through. And at the time, I was very self-judgmental. I had had supernatural experiences as a child. We may not be able to get into that today, but spirit wasn't a new thing. Supernatural wasn't a new thing, but I was still very hard on myself. I think we can be very connected to spirit and just be so hard on ourselves. And I wasn't willing to get help to process what was happening to me. And so for 3 months, this goes on, Jeff, where I am getting more and more debilitated by this experience. And I'm thinking, my husband's going to leave, at the time we were engaged, my fiance is going to leave me, because who wants to be with a woman who can't get out of bed, who can't function? And that's where I got to, because I think looking back, I was just, and I know that, I was also told, it's like you were just fighting yourself so much. And I think it's relatable, because I know that we all struggle. I know how much sometimes when we finally get to a safe place, we think we're going to be better, but maybe we aren't. Maybe we have to heal. Maybe there's things going on that we can't fully process when we're in survival mode. So, but I misunderstood. I didn't get that at the time. And so one day I am rolling out of bed, kids have already gone to school. David's at work. And I'm kind of in that funk. And I, in my bed, it's probably 10:30, 11 in the morning. And I start thinking about my situation, not being able to get out of bed. And I get super mad, actually, at that, and frustrated. And so this particular morning was not so much felt different, but I was behaving differently in that I got up, kind of put my feet on the floor, and I start talking out loud in the room. I'm actually, and I never had done that before. I didn't think about it at the time, but I was just like, I am so tired of this. I don't want to feel this way anymore. I want this to stop. I'm tired of the suffering. I'm tired, and I'm just kind of on a rant that morning. I'm trying to tell on myself. I was in this place of really feeling so desperate. And so I get up out of the bed, and we had a couple of chairs to the side of our bed in our bedroom, like a couple easy chairs, and we had a television at the time. And so I just kind of flop, when you sit down frustrated, I flop down. And I finally just go, I am so sick of hurting. And over to my right, all of a sudden, this voice says, well, CJ, you're not hurting, you're healing. So I guess because I had experiences as a child, I laughed, because that didn't alarm me to hear the voice at the time. But what was said was so loving, but firm, but amazing, because it had never occurred to me that what I was experiencing was healing. Now, I didn't exactly look to my right, but what happened in my mind so quickly, I think, was, oh, wow, 3 months have gone by and I have misunderstood completely what's going on. And so I think something, at some point when we're kicking and screaming in life, I finally, something just, it could have been the presence that was around me, but I just surrendered. I just said, if I've been wrong this whole time, I accept that. I think that's hard to admit sometimes, but I did. And I said, if I'm healing and I can't do it alone, and I literally just raised my hands up and I said, help me, God, help me. I was not at all prepared for what would happen next, Jeff, because, and I do want to explain something before I describe it, because the reason that one word changed everything for me was that hurting was in my mind was defined as a perpetual process, a never-ending story. But healing was a process, right? It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe that's why these images keep coming up to release them. Maybe I've just been wrong. But when I surrendered, all of a sudden the room starts to shift, and I'm going to try to describe it for everyone. It's hard to describe, but I look to my right, and to my right, this column of light appears, and this 10-foot angel comes in to view. I have never seen anything like it. And I just looked, and I just said, what are you doing here? It's like, why are you here? I'm a questioner, so everybody knows I'm just the most curious sort of person. So in the middle of all this thing, I'm going, why me? Why me? But as this angel appeared, the room starts to look like the air is fluid, like a ripple effect in the room. As if the quantum space, it's like, oh, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, is a little bit like that. And over in the corner of my room, because I'm diagonal across the other corner, one by one, 12 of these other angels appear there. And they have 3 sets of wings, but they look more like energy, color, different frequencies that kind of changed and fluctuated. And all of a sudden I'm in a bedroom, which isn't very, very big, with 13 of them, which at the time I didn't think of the significance of the 13 as a number, but I began to ask. I was like, well, it was as if they all kind of spoke in one voice. So the one that was to my right was saying, well, CJ, we've been here for 3 months, but you couldn't perceive us. You were being so hard on yourself that it didn't land. It wouldn't go through. And I said, oh, okay, but something you'll also learn about me is I'm a little bit of a joker, quite frankly, because I was like, well, am I that messed up that, all of you guys have to show up? And the voice said no, but you do have a lot to do in your life. God has a mission for you. We're here to help you heal this, and we're doing it at a time that you most need this so that you can do what you're supposed to do. And I went from being depressed that day to ecstatic. In fact, everything I'd had a lot of abilities as a child. I had a lot of experiences there. And it was like, because of all of the trauma, I got disconnected, right, for a period of time in my life. And then it just all came back. And suddenly I can see energy again. Suddenly I can feel everything around me in such a profound way. And I attribute it to their energy helping me to heal that day. A lot of people ask, well, were you instantly healed? Well, not completely, because I think that healing is a process, but that heavy weight that had been consuming me for 3 months just suddenly was gone. And I actually got a lot of misunderstanding from family members who saw me go from depressed and they're worried about me to suddenly here's CJ, she's back. And I didn't find out for many years later. Some of them thought I had a brain tumor, which I now laugh about because it was such a dramatic change to me. But just a single word, right, changed everything. And I think that when we're on a journey and we're trying to find who we are and we're trying to find our connection, how we see things and how we perceive them truly matters. It's important that we know sometimes that when we're going through things, that's actually a healing process. Which is why I love to tell the story. It's true whether you believe in angels or not, right? If we know that we are healing, we can get through that. It's when we've been through intense suffering and we get caught there that we can't. And since that day, I am very, very blessed, Jeff. The angel to my right continues to be there, speaking one voice for this group of seraphim that visited me. And, it was probably for the next year after that, they prophesied a lot of things to me. And I had a lot of very massive kinds of visions and things like that. I kind of talk about it like it's angel boot camp. I know that's a weird way to put it, but it was like that. They taught me. They worked with me. They helped me heal, but always stepping back when I needed to learn something on my own, because angels are like that. They don't interrupt free will, our choices, and things like that. But I absolutely continued to speak to the seraphim that day. And her name is actually more like a vibrational name, which is Uliana. So there's kind of an at the end, but I call her Uli for short. And it's easier to say, but she's still with me. And that was 20 plus years ago.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us, CJ. I first want to ask, how did your husband, I guess your fiance at the time, how did he react to your change?
I think that's a great question. And one we kind of chuckle about today because we're still together. In fact, our 25th wedding anniversary is in February. I don't think he really knew what to do at the time. I think he was happy that I was not laying in bed. But I think that he didn't really completely understand what I was going through. I think to his testament, he was incredibly gracious in that regard. He was always supportive, and he'll tell you, when I first met CJ, I didn't know about all this spirit stuff. I didn't understand all of these things. And at the time, he finally kind of admitted to me later, he wasn't really sure if I might be crazy. Who is this lady, that I met? This isn't the same person, but I was, right? Mm-hmm. But I was just happier. But he really had that ability to let that be, even if he didn't quite understand. And I think I'm so grateful for that, because I think that often when somebody, whether it's a near-death experience or suddenly a group of angels show up in your bedroom, well, that's going to change your life. But and a lot of times partners that people are with, they don't understand, or they don't believe in that person. I was very fortunate, and I think I tell people that God really matched me and David, because even though he didn't understand, he knew I believed, and that was okay with him, that I had those beliefs, because I wasn't harming anybody. I was helping people, and even in my family, they do accept that experience now. But at first, people from the outside looking in at this woman, might have thought I was on a manic high or something, or might have thought it was mental illness, or, to the outside, people try to put what has happened to you in some kind of context. And if there isn't one, then a lot of misunderstanding happens. But my husband actually, was later on, though, because there's this angelic energy around me, he eventually, down the road, had other experiences, things that he saw that made him a believer, but in his own way, right? I have been deeply spiritual and spiritualizing everything since I was very small, and I recognize, and, everyone reaches their journey differently. And I did have to recognize too, is he didn't have to believe everything that I believed. He didn't have to be where I was or how I operate spiritually, which when we were younger, I didn't quite understand that. I was like, well, are we going to stay together because we don't believe exactly the same things? But we did, so I think he took a lot in stride and kept a lot of those thinking in the back of his head for many years, but he's always supported me, really, no matter what.
That's great. What is the significance of the number 13 with 13 angels?
The number 13, if you think about it, there are circles of 12. I mean, biblically, 12 apostles plus Christ, 13. Circles where, ancient alchemy and magic happen are in circles of 12 with a facilitator. The base mathematics of the universe is 12 plus whatever binds that together, right? That is unseen. And so the significance of 13, even though we, culturally we look at 13 like Friday the 13th, and that's maybe not a good number, but it's actually a very significant number. And so, and in the way that the seraphim said, is that they typically, because of their energy and trying to help us down here, because it's not as common, then they will come together in energies like that, right, where they're in a group of them. But if you look kind of historically, you can see evidence of all kinds of groups of 12 or groups of 13. And I think that there was a significance in them coming in that number.
Are there more than 13?
There's many seraphim. Certainly, as I understand it, of the different kinds of angels, the higher in frequency, there are less of them, but there's certainly a vast number, thousands and thousands of seraphim. But typically, they aren't interacting as much. In fact, when when you have an experience like this, I guess is what I want to say next, is you kind of search for somebody else out there on the internet who's had the same experience. That's why people may be drawn to your podcast, right? Is we want someone to have had a common experience. My problem was, because this is over 20 years ago and still probably to this day, I really haven't heard the same kind of story. Angelic intervention and, experiencing, but the way they came and how they came and the group number that they came, I haven't found, it's a unique story, because I haven't found anybody. Now, if somebody's on this podcast and says, hey, 13 angels showed up, for me too, God, I'd love to hear about it, right? Because it's unusual. It's unusual. And there's also 13 archangels too. So
it's interesting. Yeah. Because
that's it's a significant number.
Makes me even go back to the Masons, because I think 13 is a significant number for them. I don't know if it's because of all the stories with the Friday to the 13th, or is there another significance? I don't know much about them, but even the American colonies is all, I think, based on the 13 number.
Right. You can see that number if you start to, those are great examples that I hadn't even thought of. Yeah, absolutely. So I think vibrationally that number is significant, because I do believe that our thoughts have energy, everything has a frequency associated with it. So there's something very powerful about that number, or I don't think we would see it reflected in all the different things that we do.
When you first heard the voice in your room that said you were healing, not hurting, basically, what did that voice sound like? Was it a male voice, a female voice?
At the time when I heard the voice, it was actually difficult to discern gender. I know that we tend to associate like a deeper voice with gender as being male, or a higher voice being female. It sounded actually a little more masculine because of the tone. But when I experienced the angel, I experienced the angel feminine. And I think that kind of lends to, they can really be experienced in either way, right? And I think that whatever we are most, because they don't have a gender, right? We call Archangel Michael. He's powerful. We consider him to have masculine energy, right? And a male name, but in their essence, angels don't have a gender. They are assigning a gender. It's our assigning that, right? And the way that they're depicted is have, like all the archangels depicted as very masculine energies, but some of them the other side too. But it was so odd because it just didn't register like that. It just was firm. It was present, and it was just really there. After I had that experience and I began to work with that particular angel who came through very often, the name that was given to me was Uliana, and seraphims don't often really have a name, but it's hard to say, but it's more vibrational. So when she gives me her name, it's like, well, this is the closest, that you can say my name. And I'm probably butchering it as well, saying Uliana, but that's kind of how I can say it. And that's why I started calling her Uli for short. But she came through later on as a very feminine energy.
Now, you mentioned that the room was kind of like the Matrix, kind of fluid-like. And NDE people will sometimes say that when they talk to God or a being, it's not only like they hear them, but they feel them. It's like they feel it. It's all one at once. Since that room was like that, would you say you're hearing it, or would you say it almost you heard it and felt it at the same time as well?
Oh, I think there was a very deep feeling, right, associated with the experience, which was so profound, right? And the feeling that I had was like home, just feeling, like our spiritual home, feeling through every cell of my body. We're really being permeated with divine love, for a lack of any other way to describe it, but it felt so familiar. Right. And it just felt like I was being held in that room by the presence of those angels. And so I think it's a great question to ask about it, because it's when you are encountering these, a lot is communicated, vibrationally, right, through a feeling, which is how we often connect with our angels in our daily life, right? It may not be a voice starts talking to you, because that's pretty intense to hear that, but it can be a feeling of presence. And so I encourage anyone to not discount when they're going, I really want to connect. I get a lot of questions about connecting with angels. And I said, well, they're always with us, but they can communicate in a variety of different ways, right? They can communicate through evoking a feeling of peace, a quality of those kinds of feelings, or they can communicate other ways through nature, through different signs and things like that. And a lot of times, they can communicate through sequences of numbers. So that's another thing that's fascinating to me, is seeing sequences of 4s or 1s. If I happen to look at the clock on a particular day and I see it when it's 11:11, and then I see it when it's 1:11, and then I'm driving down the street and I see 111 on somebody's license plate, well, then somebody probably is trying to get my attention, and so I watch for patterns, even though I am, I guess, what they would call clairaudient, where I hear as well as where I can see things. And, but a lot of times it's a feeling. It's a feeling that is different, right, than the feeling we were experiencing prior. And that was probably that, as that room shifted and that they began to appear, the incredible, that's why I think I said in the beginning of telling the story was, I don't know that I can fully describe it, because I saw colors stream through the room that I'd never seen before. So it was very brilliant. And they even told me that they appeared kind of to me in a particular way so that I wouldn't be harmed by that energy, because it is so strong. But I experienced it as color and movement, like a symphony of feeling. And so I'm really glad you asked about how that might feel, right, to be in that kind of presence.
Are you still Catholic?
I think that's a great question, because I was raised in the Catholic Church. And a lot of people, when I tell them that, they're like, well, I'm sorry, because, they're kind of caught up in the dogma, and there's a lot there to unpack, certainly. But for me as a child, with how I spiritualized things and how I felt like God was talking directly to me. I mean, my first supernatural experience was like 6 or 7. And I went to Catholic school and I got in trouble. I remember one time I wanted to go, kids were being mean and I didn't understand, because I always felt like I didn't really belong here, which I know a lot of your guests from the podcasts that I've listened to, they never felt like they were at home on the planet. And I certainly think that was true for me. But what Catholicism gave me was an anchor point to the divine. And I would go in the cathedral and I would sit in that front pew. And when I spoke to God, I received an answer. I mean, so what was incredible about being a part of that faith, the good parts, because I think we take the good, and the otherwise from our experiences, I don't think I would have had the mysticism or the frame of reference. And my Catholic family, when they found out that Grandpa passed away and appeared at the end of my bed, these are things usually that families reject. And they didn't, because in the core of the Catholic belief is a belief that God grants gifts of the Holy Spirit. So it's not considered demonic or anything like that. It's considered to be what they call a charismatic Catholic. And I'm not sure why they call it that, but they have groups for support of people who've been gifted that way. Not every parish, depends on the church, certainly. But I only have happy memories, other than the nuns getting very angry at me for disappearing from school, and they're looking for me for a couple hours, and they got everybody looking for me, and I'm sitting in church. And I used to think it was just, why am I getting in trouble for going to church? And I would often counter what the priest said too. I was a little bit of a rebel. So when they would talk about God being this punitive fire, brimstone kind of God, I would just kind of raise my hand and say, well, God's not like that. My God's not like that. God isn't this way. And I always got in trouble because I would speak up or speak out of turn, which I learned to be quiet after those things. But to answer your question, though, I just wanted to kind of preface what that ritual, what that upbringing actually meant to the core of me, other than seeing hypocrites of priests and things. It's still a part of me. And I have to say, I don't go to mass regularly, right? But I have in different periods of my life when I feel I need to connect to that energy. I do feel the presence in that ritual. And so I will pop in for mass from time to time. But I consider myself more having a direct connection. So I don't need a church family presently to do what I believe God's called me to do.
Do you think anybody can connect with their angels?
Oh, I do. I believe that we're all assigned an angel when we come to this planet. That's your guardian angel. A lot of people want to connect with their guardian angel, but they may not connect the same way that I would with Uli, because they're with you for a long period of time and they're kind of holding space, and they can intervene. When we have things that happen in our childhood, they often know when it's our time, and they're there. Other angels, from what I understand and being taught by the seraphim and Uli in particular, was angels can move in and out of our life, right? So we may get additional angels at times that we most need them. But we're never walking alone. And I think that's the important part for people to realize, is that anyone can do that. Just because I have an I had this massive experience, doesn't make me unique. I believe that everyone can connect with those energies to feel it, because the angels are meant to connect us to the divine, so we don't feel alone. Because when we come down into this existence, the veil closes and we feel cut off. It's in the deep subconscious that we no longer are home, and we come from an existence that is, everything is one. And we come into human experience, and now we're dual. We have light, dark, good, bad. Everything is put into two buckets. And I think that creates or sets up a lot of human suffering. I really do. And that's why we're given angels, to remind us, I think. Just because things are dual does not mean that I'm disconnected, right? That I'm separate. And so after this experience, a lot of what I believe I do to help others is simply to create a connection, because we need to know we're not alone. We need to know, right? And we're all kind of scared on the journey too. And, people go, well, you got it made. You got angels talking to you, you got all this. And I'm like, be careful what you wish for, because I would call it, very intense and not easy to stay grounded and all of that. But in your daily life, you can always connect to your angels. I think a lot of it just has to do with belief, knowing that we're worthy of that, Jeff, knowing that we all come from the same source. I always like to say, God don't make junk. We are immensely beautiful beings in an extraordinary existence. And without the angels in my life, I don't know that I would have ever felt that, discovered that, or just know that, right? And so anybody out there who is feeling that or is hearing my voice in this podcast, they are there, and you're never alone. And it would boggle your mind at the millions and millions of angelic beings, that are on this planet assisting us at this time. And I also really want to help some people understand that we are in a weird time right now on this planet, right? there is a lot of upheaval, a lot of chaos. The polarity is reaching kind of a stretched or breaking point. And our challenge is to be in the world, but not of it at this time. Our challenge is not to be pulled to and fro by fear or what's being driven, and to understand that the reality that's going on in here is much more important, right? What's going on here, not out there. What's happening here in your heart, in your life, that's the most important. Sometimes self-care means disconnection, right? I'm very empathic, obviously, to others. I have to take a break from news sometimes, Jeff. It's hard to watch. And I recognize anxiety. And I know a lot of your listeners might be dealing with a lot of anxiety with the pandemic and everything. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Do what you have to do. If you need to disconnect, get off of social media, stop watching the news, recenter, because the message this year has been go within, pull your energy in, keep it for yourself. I know that sounds a little weird, but because if we are way out there, this chaos that is necessary can break us apart, and we won't see the truth, which the truth is a new tomorrow, a better world. And we cannot just look at a single, very narrow point of view to the polarized sides to see the truth of what's happening. But I believe wholeheartedly that sometimes things do have to break. Sometimes, just as if, the seraphim coming to me and saying, we're the catalyst, CJ, we're going to break everything apart that you know. And it's a little bit like being thrown off a cliff. And I feel like I've transformed with their energies over and over again in my life. And I'm kind of rambling a little bit. It's just kind of coming through. I want to encourage everybody that right now, for self-care, to put themselves first. It sounds selfish, and we can have great compassion for others, but we've got to, it's like putting the mask on before you put the mask on your kid. If you lose oxygen on an airplane, it has to happen. And there's millions making that choice right now. I've seen it, and I know it's there. But when I get out in there into media and everything, that whole thing starts to distort and become its own reality, right? And we're being asked to choose at this time, kind of the reality that we want for ourselves.
Can you give us any tips on how to connect with our guardian angel? Absolutely.
I think that what kind of comes up for us when we're trying to connect, right? Let's just say I went into meditation or a prayer space, and I'm focusing, on, I really want to communicate with you. I want to be connected to you. What we want to do is be I know it's hard to be, but we have to be as relaxed about that and be patient with ourselves, because we're all in our energy field receiving information all day long, whether you realize it or not, right? So when we put a thought form out, an intention, right, it's there, it's energy. And so we have to give ourselves some time, though, once we open the connection with our conscious mind, to allow that information to begin to filter through. It's like a skill. It's like anything else. But what happens for people is they go, I don't hear anything, or I don't see anything, so I must not be doing it right. So she's starting to, Uli is actually here now. She's starting to say things. So she's giving me a little instruction here. And also just kind of egging me on, because she's like, yeah, that's it. So I kind of hear it over here right now. So I'll just say that, but to encourage you to be patient, and also we don't really get to set how the angel connects with us. Okay. So what I hear from people often is, I want to feel a touch to my shoulder, right? I want to feel this specific thing, and then I'll know. if we do that, we limit that considerably, right? So if we're more open and we go in each day and say, I really would love to hear from you. I'm struggling, or please give me a sign. Okay. And then we're present to that. It will come. It always comes. The problem is sometimes we miss the communication because they know from the outside of you the best way to talk to you at this moment. They know what our capability is to feel that, to sense it. So what they may do at the beginning of that relationship is drop a penny in your path, a feather, you may start seeing sequences of numbers, which are meant to tell you, the same sequences as I spoke a little earlier about, like ones. That's their favorite, is one, the ones in sequence. And so that would be a number of ways that angel might say, I'm here. I got you. And if, so it's a little bit like, back when I would do sessions for people, and I still continue obviously to do those today, a lot of, in the early days of that, people who are not really believing, or, and they kind of test you, they try to test you. And I think that as humans, we like to test angels. I think we like, okay, if you're really there, do this. And unfortunately, that would be great if we could dictate that. It really would be. But because that doesn't happen, doesn't mean you failed to connect, because they're right there. They are at our beck and call. They will come if we ask. And they're going to find the best way through signs externally, because not everybody is, we all have intuitive abilities. We all do. But everybody's is a little different, just like your perception of the world is yours. So we have to understand that when we're trying to talk to these beings or have them be a more dominant presence for us during a difficult time, or maybe just to awaken to your inherent abilities, they're going to start at sort of the lowest common denominator. And so we might miss that. But if we start to recognize it, guess what? That connection starts to amplify. Things come much more clearly. And over time, you establish a much more direct connection. So whether you're just in straight meditation asking, or you're doing an invocation or a prayer or something you found online, it's like when you put in something to manifest, you cast it out into the universe. And so people often talk about manifesting what we want and things like that, but we need to allow the universe to support that, and in the same way, and it takes time. So patience is kind of key. And this is something that Uli's laughing about right now, because when we first started working the way that we do, I was not a patient person. I wanted it right now. And they just kind of chuckled at me because they're ornery at times, and said, well, CJ, in fact, it was probably, I hadn't been a very big meditator, at one point. And they said, CJ, you need to slow down. You need to just be. And I'm like, but you guys gave me a mission. You told me I'm going to write this book. You told me I'm going to do this. I got to go. I got to do it. And they're like, slow down. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, you have to develop more presence here inside, and you have to be in the moment, not in the past or looking at the future, but right here, right now, which we hear that term, right, in a lot of spiritual circles. But the present moment is the most important. And then I slow down because I'm a doer. And I go, am I slow enough now? And they go, no. And I'm like, I'm crawling, so I do have disagreements with my angels, with Uli sometimes, because I don't understand what they're trying to teach, or I'm impatient with myself. So to answer your question, I think patience is kind of key, and just understanding that you can broad stroke that, right, by setting the intention and then just be in the present moment and pay attention, because they will use everything around you to say we're here.
I'm glad you mentioned your book, because we're running out of time and I wanted to talk to you about it. It's called Angel Incarnate, One Birth. And can you tell us a little bit about what it is about?
I'd love to. Back when they first came in that first year, when I said they prophesied a lot, they said, hey, you're going to write a book. It's going to be called Angel Incarnate. Gave me the title. And I said, what? I mean, I thought it was a great assignment because I always wanted to be a novelist when I was a kid, I wanted to write. And, but it took me almost 15 years to write the book. What they wanted me to do was tell the story of an angelic being sent to the world in human form. And through the telling of the story, they wanted me to teach different spiritual things. And so the book, it took me a long time to write. And it's about a woman named Catherine. And she goes through this extraordinary phase of awakening. And in this telling of the story, there's a prophecy, an ancient one, that says that God will eventually send angels to earth in human form. Now, this is beyond what we call people on the planet who behave like angels, earth angels or light workers. It's a true evolution of mankind that would allow this to happen. And so it's a lot like the Celestine prophecy, because it's a story, it's a journey. In the story, it's got good guys, bad guys, trying to stop her from waking up. And so it's a supernatural, I say, fiction novel, but it tells the story of one birth, a human being who's really an angel. And you get to go on the roller coaster with her of fear, denial, all the things we might have happened to us. But I am a very visual writer, so it's an immersive story. So the feedback I have gotten is that once you get past page 60, it's kind of like a snowball rolling downhill, and you can't quite put it down. But it was extraordinary that they did that. And when I was writing it, which is almost its whole other story, I honestly didn't know if I was writing the book or the book was writing me. That's hard to describe, but there was a deep sense of downloading, as if the story had already been written in the ether somewhere, and I was merely its facilitator. There were times that I might plan, because I write from scene to scene, right? I would let it come through and I would see it, and then I'd write it. And there were times that even my characters would do something other than what I had anticipated. And so I guess when I describe it, to me, in my heart, it's a living, breathing story. And the reason it had to be about an angel coming to earth is because of how common across all faiths angelic beings are. So there's a purpose and a reason that it had that topic, but it's also telling a truth about the fact that this actually is occurring at this pivotal time, that there is a ground force, and many of these incarnate angels do not know, that they are, or have forgotten, or haven't been able to handle that knowing. And so it's supposed to be an activating book. And so people tell me, and I've had wonderful letters, emails. Nobody sends snail mail anymore, so emails. You restored my faith in God. Stuff that I wouldn't have anticipated just by being willing to step up and tell the story. So I absolutely was happy that I fulfilled that. I didn't know it was 4 books, though. So I don't think the seraphim wanted me to know, because they knew it'd be believing in myself enough to write it. Those are the things, like, okay, so angels show up and say, you're going to write this novel, and it's going to be this, and it's going to be that. And you go, okay, where do I start with that? And then, it's raising kids, right? Because I raised 4 kids, and I kept putting it down and picking it back up, and putting it down and picking it back up, writing it. And of course, every time my energy would change and I'd have to almost rewrite the whole thing. And then they said to me in 2012, when there was a major gateway of energy, you've got to release it. This first book this year, they told me I had to self-publish it, but that eventually the whole series would be picked up by a publisher. They've said it was going to be turned into a movie. They've told me a lot of things. And so I'm working on the second book, which is Two Worlds, which is the continuation of her journey. The first book is really a metaphor for our own journey back to the divine within ourselves, right? When we discover that truth that we feel disconnected from, but it's really there. And the second book is called Two Worlds, right? Which is, now I'm awakened, but now I'm existing in this world as also a spiritual being. So regardless of whether you're an incarnate angel, technically or not, we all experience that. So the second book is knows she's a human and an angel. How the heck do you do that, right? How do we stay in presence with the daily stuff and then the human stuff we want to do? Her love in the book is actually based on a true character, my husband, David. And so I did get to put a lot of my life in this story, right? But it's inspired by a true story and my encounter with the seraphim. And so it's available on my website as well as Amazon. But if people buy it direct from me, they get a little angel message. So whatever the seraphim want me to write in it, I will write in it and send that out. So, and it's on sale right now, so for $11.11. But right, numbers. So, but yeah, I feel very blessed to have written the first book, and took some time off this year from teaching and my schedule to really focus on book 2. And I do think I have a publicist that's kind of lining up for the first book. So it's a good time to talk about it.
After seeing this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so, how do they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's just an inquiry, I do have a pretty full schedule, but I will answer I'll answer emails, and I know people might have a question about working with me because I do work one-on-one with people. So they can reach out to me on my website, which is www.cjmartes.com. So check the spelling. And so there's links there to the book, how to contact me. I'm also on Facebook as my name. I'm also on Instagram as my name. So you can kind of connect with me in different ways, right? And so I also wanted to mention, I intuited today that I wanted to offer all your podcast listeners until the end of the year. So anyone who listens to this can use this $40 off an hour session with me just by using JeffMara 2021. So the discount code, I want to offer that. The other thing too is if I'm able to, if it's a financial burden, I just ask that you contact me. I'll see if that's a good fit. I do work with people, and I work with people all over the world, right? So I can't promise that I can lower the cost, but I am willing to look at individual situations. Because when, I've always had this thing about an exchange, right? I think that there has to be an exchange for any spiritual services that you get. At the same time, there's so many that can pay what I feel like my value is, and it allows me then to help others who may not. And so it all evens out, right? That's kind of my business model, if you can call it that, but it's just taking people on a case-by-case basis. Because if we're meant to work together, and I discern that, right? If I feel that, I don't turn people away, Jeff, because I really am on a mission here. And I'm just, so happy to tell this story when I get the opportunity. I think that people need to know that we're not alone, that there is hope. And that we are extraordinary beyond measure. We were made that way. Our spirit is infinite. And anytime I can share the joy I have at just knowing that all the way through me, 110%, if I can convey any of that to any of your listeners, then I feel happy, because it's about our connection and helping each other. We need to be good citizens. We need to be good stewards of the earth and each other. And I think that's one of the things that the angels are trying to tell us all the time.
All right. Well, before we finish up, do you have one last positive message that you can share with everybody?
If there are things that you're presently struggling with, and I know that I can feel it every day, struggle after struggle. There are hard times for so many of us. Don't lose hope. Sometimes it can look so bleak, and when we lose hope, we close the channel of possibilities for God, who, however you feel that presence is, whatever term you want to use. And what I have seen over 25 years is when things seem at their darkest moment, right? Because my life hasn't just been a picnic since they showed up. I've had things bad happen in my life. When I can have some faith in there, and sometimes it's our faith in ourselves in order to be able to keep going, but don't lose hope. Ask for help. If that's somebody that you know, or that's the divine, you deserve help. You're worthy of it. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to believe, right? That we're worthy. We're worthy to receive the gift of angels. We're worthy to receive the gift of people who we are safe to open our hearts to. We're worthy of that. And I'm actually speaking from my own experience. I mean, I was so humbled by what happened to me. And I thought, who am I? Who am I to be in the presence of something this extraordinary? And Uli would say, who am I not to be? And their love for us is just like God's love. And so ask for help.
Thank you for that message. And CJ, thank you for being my guest. When you get your next book out, contact me so we can get you back and talk about that. And I'm sure I have more questions about angels.
Oh, that would be fantastic, Jeff. I love what you're doing. You keep doing it, okay?
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I will. And I wish you the best and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.